Okay, let me start. I hope you hear me. You see my screen. So let me start briefly present our context and what were our actions to respond to that crisis situation happening in Ukraine with the large-scale aggression of Russian Federation launched last year. Let me remind you the fact, which is 100 years old. In February 1918, the capital city of Ukraine was occupied by Russian Soviet soldiers. They killed civilians on the streets for being dressed in Ukrainian traditional embroidered shirts. In that way, the Ukrainian Revolution of 1918-1921 started, with a hope to turn Ukraine, invaded by communist Russia, into an independent democratic nation. But that fight for Ukraine's freedom unfortunately failed. And history repeats itself. On February 2022, explosions woke me up in Kyiv. Russian airstrikes, missiles shelling, and tank fires touched not only my family and my nation, they touched our cultural identity, our centuries-old heritage. So why this unprovoked full-scale aggression happened? According to many historians, evaluation of Euromaidan, a new nation was born in Ukraine with intrinsic political belief in democracy and liberty. The Euromaidan revolution was the first response to Russia's open aggression towards Ukraine in 2014. The Kremlin regime does not try to hide the fact that the open invasion was a kind of revenge for the Euromaidan events and for the choice of the Ukrainian nation to move forward a civilized and democratic future. So the Maidan protests destroyed Moscow's plans to seize Ukraine stealthily, quietly, through political collaborators at the highest level of government and using hybrid technologies. Since Crimea and part of Donbass were occupied by Russia in 2014, it was a crucial need for cultural activists in Ukraine to obtain broader knowledge on various aspects of emergency response and resilience of the cultural sector, to build capacities, to strengthen communities, and inspire them with hope for a sustainable future. Unfortunately, and it's a fact, Ukraine was not ready to effectively protect its cultural heritage in that time, due to the lack of relevant knowledge, resources, experience, coordination, and most importantly, lack of awareness at the highest decision-taking levels of the role of Ukrainian identity in this war, understanding that it is precisely in the crosshairs of Putin's terrorist regime. Speaking about the endangered heritage, culture, and arts in Ukraine, we should also mention the cultural infrastructure, which is quite big. So it's not only about buildings, it's also about people. Russia has ignored international military and humanitarian laws, as well as the Hague Convention of 1954 and its protocol on the protection of cultural property in the event of armed conflict. Both protocols are not spontaneously or due to so-called military necessity. The desire to reboot the cultural identity of Ukrainians was at the core of the Kremlin's genocidal policy. And the results of this policy speak for themselves. During over 20 months of the full-scale war, over 1,800 objects of cultural infrastructure in Ukraine were damaged, and over 500 were completely destroyed, according to the Ministry of Culture and Informational Policy of Ukraine statistics. And this list includes, as you see in the slides, hundreds of cultural centers, historical and architectural monuments, religious buildings, libraries, dozens of museums and galleries, theaters, and philharmonies. The official statistics of destructions are shocking but incomplete, as Ukraine has no access to temporary occupied territories, and cannot assess the range of war impact there. Thus, satellite laboratories of the United States and the United Kingdom help monitor the condition of cultural objects, providing information from regions temporarily not under control of Ukraine, and help to document the facts of attack on heritage. Intentional missile hit of the Ivankiv Museum in Kiev region with a unique collection of works of naive painting, including of the world-famous Maria Primachenko, whose paintings were admired by Pablo Picasso. You can see what is left from the historical building which hosted the collection of famous Ukrainian naive artists, including Maria Primachenko, the photo upright. And also you can see another case of the intentional attack on the museum. This is a Grigory Skovoroda museum very close to Kharkiv. And these intentional attacks are confirmed by international experts. And a few more facts. In October 2022, Russian missiles attacked dozens of cultural institutions and museums in downtown Kyiv, capital of Ukraine, within the UNESCO Heritage List zone. In July 2023, the massive missile, shelling destroyed damaged many historical sites in the Odessa Historical Center, also inscribed into the UNESCO Heritage List, including a number of museums and the biggest Orthodox cathedral dated late 18th century. And the shellings in Odessa in particular continue until now. Recently, the Odessa Art Museum was badly damaged by Russian missiles. So intentional damage is being documented by a number of monitoring labs worldwide and nationally. And here's an example from the Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab, which is hosted by Virginia Museum of Natural History in partnership with SCRI, Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative. And so you can see the case, they documented one of the first attacks on museums, Ivankiv museums. And you can see the comparison of two different pictures, before the attack and after. And this information, these facts, provides enough proofs, evidences that the attack was intentional. Let me display some more well-known cases of the damaged heritage and cultural objects in Ukraine since February 2022. So cultural centers in different regions, in northern Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine, in the south, a lot of theaters, including Mariupol, well-known theater, where people tried to find a shelter against Russian air bombs, but in vain. Many of them were killed by deliberate air bombing of this Mariupol theater, despite the inscriptions outside, in front and behind the building, that the children are inside. Also, beside this, a lot of religious sites were damaged, and the scale of destruction is very dramatic. Some well-known cases, much more unknown because Ukraine has no access, especially to the current gray zone. A lot of religious sites were changed, transformed by Russian troops into hospitals, into storages for arms and food. And here's one of the examples where Russians organized a military hospital in Malakomyshuvacha, close to Izium, where severe battles took place last autumn. So a lot of monuments and sculptures also were damaged during this wartime. Museums, some of them here also iconic examples of the Vasil Tarnovsky Museum, now used library, which today is being under stabilization and early recovery museum in Ochtyrka due to international donors and organizations who provided funds to stabilize. But many of them are left intact, and they need stabilization efforts. And here's an example from the Scientist House in Odessa, damaging in particular very valued interiors, including some objects inside, like this piano, which was played by Liszt, Ferenc Liszt. The other issue, besides the damage because of military actions or intentional damage, is of course the issue of looting, and the war crimes against culture were aggravated by looting and illegal trafficking. And we have a lot of cases, and in Mariupol, in Melitopol Museum, the looting of Melitopol historical treasures, including the Kisingol collection, is well known. Mariupol also with the collection, art collections, medallion art collections, and so many, unfortunately, cases. And but the mentioned laboratories, satellite laboratories, also help document not only damage of the buildings, but also the facts of looting the collections. And here, one of the example, the fact when the Russians provided so-called special operation to loot Kherson Art Museum, and there is a video how the district where two museums, art museums and local law museum in Kherson, were blocked by military, how they take out boxes with artifacts, load into the trucks, and take them away. And here you can see that sometimes collections are being identified, and evidences of the looted paintings from Kherson art museums were found in temporarily occupied Crimea, in the central Tavrida Museum in Simferopol. And of course, it is proved by international scholars, in particular by Brian Daniel. According to him, and he's director of the Center for Cultural Heritage at the University of Pennsylvania Museum. The treasure hunting by Russians in Ukraine is a deliberately planned operation, focused not only to loot historical, monetary, or artistic values, but to undermine Ukrainian identity. But at this point, let me shift not only to damage, destruction, looting, but to cultural resistance points, because immediately after February 24 last year, the Ukrainian cultural sector quickly self-organized. The newly created public and volunteer initiatives strived to protect their collections and premises and helped others, coordinating efforts at different levels, providing support both to institutions, local and central governments. At the same time, cultural activists in cooperation with local governments and communities turned public and historical artistic cultural spaces into cultural barricades, sheltering monuments and sculptures, facade decorations, and other artistic and historical objects with OSB panels and sandbags for protection. And the solidarity of the whole world coming together to protect culture in times of war in Ukraine is unprecedented in scale. So in this situation, the Heritage Emergency Response Initiative, briefly HERI, it was launched to respond to this crisis, and we created a wide network of partnerships for museums, archives, and libraries, coordinating its activities with national and international governments and NGO sectors. Since then, due to international support from UNESCO, ICOMOS, ICROM, ALIF, Prince Claus, Sir, Smithsonian Institution, US Ambassadors Fund, World Monument Fund, Global Heritage Fund, Europa Nostra, and many, many others, we have provided rescue operations, provided organizational support and assistance to over 400 museums and cultural institutions from 22 regions in Ukraine and carried out a number of expeditions, educational and training programs. So now Harry is actively engaged in various processes to promote and contribute to the preservation of cultural heritage during wartime, coordination of aid initiatives, assessment and documentation of losses and damage, rescue of the collections, and of course recording oral stories from the ground, musification and memorialization of the war, and cultural resistance, post-war recovery and modernization of culture. And of course, among our main functions and goals is to increase resilience to emergencies in Ukraine. So you can see some slides from our field trips, which we organize all over Ukraine where we have access. And recently, because there is a critical need to get access to territories temporarily closed for civilians, we initiated and organized a kind of a prototype of CPP unit, Cultural Property Protection Unit, within territorial defense, and a part of Harry initiative is a part of this unit, and we planned actively launched operations and field trips to document damage and crimes against culture in that zones closed for cultural experts and civilians. You can see that a lot of international missions participated in documenting and assessing damage and risks, and we had international missions from ICOMOS, ICROM, ICOM, ALIF, other international donors. And one of the focus activities and needs at the moment is to build capacities, to develop capacities, and an intensive training process has been established. We have a lot of suggestions, proposals, and already done training courses provided by ICROM, UNESCO, ICOMOS, with the help of the SIR, ALIF, Ambassadors Fund, SCRY, and you can see some slides from the recent courses supported by Ambassadors Fund, UNESCO, ICROM, and ICOMOS. And of course, it's very important for us to adjust and to develop a lot of guidelines, instructions, methodologies, because the such full-scale aggression is unprecedented in the world history, and sometimes the already developed strategies and approaches and the best practices is not always efficient enough in Ukraine. And therefore, we are so grateful to international partners for having possibility, for example, to translate like this UNESCO's and ICROM's, SIRS and Prince Claus methodologies, but we would like to adjust them, to approbate them in the field, and then to launch in Ukraine. But also we have to develop some very specific kind of guidelines which are connected to the legal situation, and the balance of responsibilities. What should the leadership of the cultural institution do when their cultural venues, their museums, archives, libraries are occupied by military? What are their actions not to be blamed in collaboration later, and to save the human lives and to save collections? Where is the balance? And a lot of so different contexts and a lot of questions still open, because we have some cases when the very precious collections were looted or seized by Russians because of collaboration from some museums directors. And the most famous case is Melitopol Museum, for example. But in this situation, it's not easy to properly answer the reason, because sometimes Russians torture museum professionals, they kidnap, like in Melitopol, the director Leila Ibrahimova were kidnapped, and I'm sorry, not Melitopol, but Kherson Museum, Kherson Local Law Museum. There were some facts of collaboration. So in this connection, there are a lot of very important issues which should be investigated, and later on, some practices should be discussed and shared internationally to prevent such a situation for the future. And of course, we adopted the ICROM's handbook and toolkit, and of course, what is badly needed today, and we discuss a lot with our international partners, coordination and sustainability of all the tremendous efforts from Ukrainian side, from national. We need to transform all that efforts, all that new knowledge, new experiences, new collaborations, new partnerships into a kind of a cultural emergency response and resilience system. And we have developed it, and we shared it with our international partners, and we are in the process to implement it phase by phase. But of course, we need coordination on different levels, like on EU, European Union Commission. They have a special subgroup, and they develop some strategies which should be implemented on European Union and Ukrainian level. We need a lot of changes in our legislation, trying to harmonize this with European Union legislation. We should introduce a lot of changes on local level, on the local of regions, because in Ukraine we have a process of decentralizations, and sometimes Ministry of Culture and Information Policy is not very effective because a lot of decisions are taken on local level. And it's a good signs of this new transformation and changes that Blue Shield Ukraine finally were officially established in Ukraine. We have Kirill Koptsev, who is official representative, and he's also served in Armed Forces of Ukraine, having a very clear vision what is needed and what can be the role of Blue Shield in protecting Ukrainian cultural heritage according to the Hague Convention and both protocols. And of course, we have a lot of challenges on this path. To name a few, we need better coordination, which I mentioned. We need a crisis management system and leadership in emergency management. We need strategic planning for crisis response and post-war recovery. We need strategies for restitution and repatriation of cultural values, and bringing those responsible for cultural crimes to justice. We have to respond to the fact that the war keeps going on. There is uncertainty and possible actions for employees and cultural institutions in the occupied territories, and the social vulnerability of cultural workers and forced immigration is increasing, unfortunately. And there is also fatigue, exhaustion, and burnout. But nonetheless, we look into the future with hope, having a strong belief that all these challenges will be successfully met and turned into important experiences for other contexts and our strengths, making the world cultural field more protected and resilient. At this point, I'd like to complete my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for organizing such like conferences, discussions, and please try to find the best ways to share your outcomes, your suggestions, the results of this conference with your Ukrainian colleagues who at this moment cannot join these international meetings in person, even virtually, because many of them engaged in the resistance processes. Many of them are in the front lines, but they will be happy and to learn more how you suggest, how you can suggest what we can do here in Ukraine in particular, do to protect the cultural heritage of Ukraine, which is a part of the world heritage, in the most efficient way. Thank you for your attention and look forward to further partnership.